Dr. Robin Batterham, thank you for joining us at Achieve Magazine. The theme for World Environment Day on the 5th of June this year is Your Planet Needs You, Unite to Combat Climate Change. How would you describe the current state of the planet in terms of tackling climate change?
I think this is a great opportunity to have a think about what we're all doing individually, at company level, at government level, and what we go and how we go from here. To me, there's no doubt on climate change. The point is that if you take the science that we are pretty certain about and run it forward in the models, we're in deep trouble.
There's no doubt we have to act, but what should we be doing?
It's interesting because in some ways it's easy to talk, it's easy to wave the arms around, and it's easy to do certain things. But if you sit down and do the sums and look at the political side, the economic side, the social as well as the technological, and then it's not quite so clear about what the smartest things to be doing are. For example, leaving your phone charger, your mobile phone charger, plugged in all the time is using power. You can say, hey, I can help save the environment, I can pull my phone charger out when I'm not using it. And the answer is, bravo, that will make a small difference. It's equivalent to driving your car for 1 second. Now think about, instead of driving your car around to the store just to pick up the local paper or some such, walking instead, how many phone charger equivalents that is. So I'm not against everyone doing their little bit, but I do think that we have to take a somewhat more rational approach as to how are we going to significantly reduce our emissions. It's not going to come about just because we talk about it. To me, the big challenge is how are we going to drag through the major new technologies which are going to transform the profile of emissions. If I use as just as a simple example, iron and steel making, the process by which iron is made, the first step in getting through to steel, really hasn't changed for almost 2,000 years. So you look at that and say, okay, what's the next step? Well, now the next step for iron making is going to be low emission iron making, and it's got a chance of coming through. But it's a major new technology, and when you invest in a plant of this nature, and it'll have carbon capture and storage, if you invest in a plant of that nature, you're going to be putting not millions, but billions on the table. But if you don't know what that emission price is going to be, then are you really going to put billions on the table with the uncertainty of a new process, whether it'll work well at full scale, whether it'll come up to speed in an adequate time, processes that take years to come up to speed lose your money, and you don't know what the price is in effect going to be of carbon. So with all of those uncertainties, the incentive to bring on the transformational technologies is very low at the moment. That to me is the single biggest thing that we've got to concentrate on. How do we get the transformations through?
How do you accelerate technological change given the current climate?
I think that there's actually opportunity here. The fact that we've got an economic slowdown and its dreadful impact around the world, the fact that we've got this at the moment is actually giving us some breathing space. Now we can use this breathing space in two ways. We can use it to say, oh, thank goodness the pressure on emissions is coming off because production is down around the world and wow, saved at the last minute. That's just hogwash. If you're going to do 50 to 80% or more reduction by 2050, giving yourself a couple of years more of doing nowhere near enough just isn't a smart formula. But if we're not building new plants at the moment at the frenetic rate that we were up until a year or so ago, that's actually the opportunity to do a bit of thinking, to do a bit of development, and to come up with some smarter routes forward. And I would look at this and say, for example, for power generation, or for that matter, for major new industrial processes. If you've got a new process which is far better for emissions and energy consumption than a previous one, but it's got risks associated with it. This is the time to be de-risking it. And de-risking, of course, involves all of those elements: the social, the environmental, the economic, the political framework.
What are some of the changes happening in the mining sector?
Climate change is going to mean that overall around the world we will see this continuing trend to decarbonise at a net level, decarbonise operations. We will also see, I think, we'll see two paths. That's the first. The second path that we'll see is that even if you decarbonise, energy is going to keep on costing you, and probably costing you more, because the demand for energy, courtesy of the developed world and the developing world, but developing world in particular, is on the rise. It's not necessarily that energy is scarce in the long run, but in the shorter run, easily produced low-cost energy is, I think, this is a personal view, going to face scarcity and hence real price rises. Now, if you look at the decarbonising, this is technologically possible. One of my main themes that says we have to get on with the transformational technologies. We have to implement them, we have to learn by doing, get the costs down, get all of the unknowns in it. Carbon capture and storage is a good case in point. We could go within of order 3 to 5 years for all new capacity and even some retrofit on iron making and on new electricity generation to very low emissions if we bring in carbon capture and storage.
The mining industry and sustainability, are they at odds?
That's a good question. How do you get the energy, because that's the main driver of emissions, down in mining? And I think you could say, well, you've got essentially a couple of broad directions, one of which is, well, change the nature of the process. Instead of digging up a huge amount of material to extract perhaps 0.3% of it as a valuable component, don't dig it up. Don't spend the time, energy and resources and what have you. And you would have to say that ultimately in-place leaching, for example for copper, would be one such. Now you've got to be very sure that however you did this was sustainable. So that comes to, what does sustainability actually mean in a mining environment? Now I would suggest to you that essentially sustainability in the mining industry is about doing more with less for more people. This is a friend of mine, Ramesh Mashalkar, who heads a global research organisation. He was Chief Scientist of India, amongst many other things, and he calls it Gandhian engineering. And I think it's a marvellous sort of simple descriptor that sort of makes you think about what is sustainability and what can I do about it, for example, in a company that is operating as a miner. So do more with less for more. So the do more is, okay, instead of extracting 60% of the resource, how do we engineer it so that we're extracting 90% or 96%, as the case may be? So the with less is, instead of taking off 10 times the volume with all the weight involved and all the mining involved to get the 1/10 that might be deep down, how do you just tackle what's down there at a deep level? There's no shortage worldwide of most resources for the foreseeable future. We will in time, that's a pretty broad statement by the way, but that's one that I think we can justify. We will in time of course move to economies where there's no primary production, everything recycled. But recycling always costs you energy. If you want to come back up to the same quality level, it's going to cost you energy. So sustainability in the long run for me says no more primary production, and I don't know whether that's 50 years off or 100 years off, but that's the sort of timescales we're talking about. Because by then we'll have sorted out our energy into long-term, no carbon, no net carbon sources. Full stop, end of story. For now, with our primary production, to keep things more sustainable, we've got to invest a bit more in Gandhian engineering.
SKM is a firm of scientists, engineers and project managers. How will our role change as we move forward into the future?
SKM and other major contracting firms, I think, have got an important role. Over and above perhaps what they've been used to, but I'm showing a certain amount of ignorance here. I think there is a fairly massive education and de-risking process that's needed. One of the things about leading edge engineering is that it's all about risk-taking. It's actually about coming up with designs and the implementation of them that come through at an appropriate level of risk. And an appropriate level of risk is where the end user gets the product they thought they were paying for, and of course does so with minimum cost, minimum time, etc., fit for purpose. And I've suggested all the way through that we're going to need a lot of new technologies, transformational technologies. And I think the role of particular companies can be to home in on some subsets of all of these new technologies that they become expert providers in. Probably in some partnerships which are a bit wider than a lot of us have thought before. So you look at some of this into the future and say, well, if we're going to be putting in some major new transformational technologies, how do I as a company best position myself? And the answer is you not only go out on this risk curve and build up the experience, which allows you to have the credibility in the area, you also go out looking for some quite different partners, I think, in the long run. So that's one point. The other is the public education. I think there's a real role to play for those that understand the background science and the technology of the processes that they're engineering to educate public and politicians about what the real risks and opportunities, particularly when we're talking emissions reductions, are.
Dr. Batterham, I sense you're very positive about the future. Do you believe that we as a human race can save the planet?
Yeah. Overall, I'm positive about the future. And why I'm positive is that I think that it is possible to even use this time of financial difficulties to rethink some of our options. What I hope we can do in this time is not just wave the flag about the need for transformational technologies, although I'm very happy to keep waving that, but to get people to have a much higher awareness of what their emissions are and what the options are for getting them down.
Dr. Batterham, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.